Hi, welcome everybody to Retiring from the Military, a Millionaire. I am Nicole and I will be facilitating this hour-long dialogue with Carol and Doug, our special guests who are here to help us learn how to become a little bit more financially independent and living a fulfilled life. So as we get started, a special welcome to Doug and Carol. Can you just briefly tell us about yourself? Let the audience know a little bit about you.
Carol, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I am Carol Pittner. I am Dad's daughter, obviously. I was born and raised in Hawaii, and I did the rebellious thing. My parents told me not to join the Navy, so that's exactly what I did. And after doing 6 years in the Navy, I decided that I wanted a break. I wanted to slow down. And oh, by the way, this is the perfect time to have a family. So I'm now officially a stay-at-home mom, just enjoying life and enjoying the quiet of coronavirus, actually.
Thanks, Carol. And how about you, Doug?
I did 20 years of active duty in the U.S. Navy's submarine force between 1982 and retired in 2002. My wife also Navy active duty and later in the Navy Reserve. We both had a high savings rate during our careers. We reached financial independence in 1999, but back then we didn't know enough about it to understand that we had reached it at that point. But when I retired in 2002, we had learned more about our finances by then. We knew we were financially independent. And once I retired from active duty, we spent more time with family and went on to enjoy life. And it's been over 18 years now. I've written the book on military financial independence. And with Carol, we've also written the book on raising your money-savvy family. So we're here today to talk about whatever questions everybody has on those two topics or any other questions. We're used to having these things go completely off script.
Yes, so for those of you who are joining us, please use the chat feature. If there's anything that you want to find out about gaining your financial independence, please by all means put it in the chat and we'll certainly get it to Doug and Carol. So as we get started here, Doug mentioned that they wrote these two books. I had the pleasure of reading Raising Your Money Savvy Family for the Next Generation Financial Independence. And Doug, one thing that really struck out to me, just even opening the book, was that you talked about financial independence is not about building riches. It is about, the privilege of choice and living a fulfilled life. Tell us more about that.
That quote comes from my spouse, Marge, and Carol and I are beginning to think we should really have three authors on the cover of that book because that seems to be the quote that resonates with everyone. And you're not out there to take over the world and have a gazillion dollars and spend your entire life flying first class and sailing to your yacht, unless you want to. And then you've got to be willing to work for it. But the whole point of financial independence is to give you choices. And when you reach that financial independence threshold, that means that you can continue to work. If you enjoy working and you're challenged and fulfilled, well, just keep doing more of that. If it turns out one of the reasons you reached financial independence is because you hate your job, well, now it's time to think about changing your job or changing your career even, or just going and doing a thing you've always wanted to do. Maybe you've got some big audacious goal like hiking the Appalachian Trail from one end to the other. And in this case of Carol and me, we joked about when I retired that we would have to learn to surf. You can't just surf all day. What are you going to do all day was what I was hearing from a lot of people. And well, yeah, it turns out you actually can surf all day. But we took family surfing lessons on the day that I retired from active duty. And we were both hooked. We both really enjoyed it. And so surfing has become a big part of my life and a big part of Carol's life. And now that I'm a grandparent, now that she and her spouse are raising our granddaughter, we're about to start another surf lesson for a baby. This is going to be a bit of a challenge.
That's awesome. So, and Carol, growing up, and most people tend to think that, gosh, to save and become a millionaire, you need to make those choices and deprive yourself. What did privilege of choice mean to you? And then did you have to deprive yourself to get to where you are today?
So the privilege of choice is to choose the lifestyle that you want to have. And I never really felt deprived. What was always key was that Dad would talk about the difference between frugality and deprivation. Frugality is when you're, maybe you're cutting back on your expenses. Maybe you're eating at home a few more times than you would normally would. But deprivation is when you're cutting off the electricity or you're just making yourself uncomfortable for no reason. And so you have to kind of toe that line, figure out where you're going to be comfortable, where it's just frugality. And if you find yourself going into deprivation, then pull back. Always go back into something that's a little bit more, not limiting, but go into something that's a little bit more freeing for yourself.
So when you talk about frugality as well, Doug, you also mentioned you could afford anything but everything. Tell us more about that phrase.
Well, I joke about this with military families because we already know where the line is between frugality and deprivation because we spend too much time on the wrong side of that line. And when you start figuring out where you're going to spend your money, to most people, it's a personal choice, an intensely personal choice. So you're going to track your spending, and eventually you're going to look back on a couple of months worth of records of your spending habits. And when you look at that, you'll see places where you're spending money on things that are important to you. And you'll also see places where you're spending money that, looking back, are not so important anymore. And so you're just looking at your expenses, where the money has gone, and you're cutting out the waste. And the things that you're spending your money on, you're finding those of value to you because you're willing to work for it. You know, if it's something that you think is a good idea to spend your money on, then you're going to be willing to work the extra months, maybe even the extra years to reach financial independence and still be able to do those things. But usually when you sit down and look at your expenses after a few months have gone by and look where you've been spending your money, the part that's wasted, the part that you feel is wasted, that's pretty straightforward, pretty clear, and you can start whittling down on that and cutting that out right away.
But you know, as we have this conversation around money, it seems like a daunting task. Okay, I got to go find the wastage. I got to go look at my budget. But you broke it down very simple and saying, we can do this in 20 minutes a day. Tell us how you did that.
Well, it's kind of a family joke, this 20 minutes a day, because when Carol was growing up, she would wait for the perfect moment to do some chore. And sometimes the chore was only a 20 or 30-minute chore anyway. And she would spend an hour waiting for the right moment on the calendar and setting up for it and getting her. It was just that day when all the stars aligned and everything happened and the unicorn went through the front yard to help her get ready. And so we started looking at just doing a little bit on whatever chore it was every day, 20 minutes a day. And so that tiny little approach to getting your charge card receipts organized, getting your checking book caught up, getting your software, entering all the spending data, whatever you do with your finances. I'm trying to avoid using the B word here, but your spending plan, your budget, whatever you do on that, it should be easy, something that you can put into a daily habit, and you really don't necessarily need to spend 20 minutes a day on it. And you don't need to wait until that one day a month or that one day a week. And so that's how the 20 minutes a day came about, is just to break those big tasks that seem really ugly and indefinite and break them down into little tiny chores, little tiny tasks, and get those done. But that was part of raising a child, to get them to understand that big projects like the big science project when you're in high school, that's 20 minutes a day there, and it's 20 minutes a day in your finances. And it's the same in both. Now, I'm not expecting people to go out and build big fancy budget spreadsheets unless you're a nerd like me and you enjoy that stuff. But instead, focus on what is wasted in your spending. But we also talk about the big decisions. And the big decisions usually become clear after you've made them. Maybe going into that decision, you'll be aware of it. But the big three are where you live, what you drive, and what you eat. And those three decisions can really chew up over half of your income. Half of your spending can be food, transportation, and shelter. So if you make the right choices up front on those and figure out arrangements that you can tolerate, then you'll have much more flexibility in the rest of your spending. Get those big three right, and you don't have to worry about feeling guilty about getting a Starbucks Frappa Latte every morning.
Yeah, and you know, that 20 minutes a day, you know, the Pareto principle, you know, 20% of what you do have that 80% impact. So I can definitely see the correlation with money. And being one too that, you know, I don't follow a budget per se, but I do have a general idea of where my expenses are going, and trying to be very lean with it and remove all that waste. Because, you know, years ago when I started my journey towards financial independence, and especially, you know, come to tax time where you're collecting all your receipts, you're looking at your credit card bill and realizing, what? I spent this much, where did this money go? And then of course, what do you have to show for it, you know? So Carol, with you growing up in such a financially savvy household, Especially coming into your teen years, how did that, how did you even get interested in managing your money?
It started out on the simple side of things. I started getting an allowance when I was about 4, almost 5 years old. And at the time, I only got 3/4, which in my 5-year-old mind, that was perfect for 3 pencils from the pencil vending machine in the library at kindergarten. And, that was my goal as a kid, is I just wanted to have as many pencils as I could lay my hands on. But as I got older, that goal changed. Now it was Pokemon cards. Now it was Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Now it was being able to go to Jamba Juice and Starbucks with my other friends as a teenager. And so when it came to figuring out what was wasteful and setting a budget, mom and dad did the opposite. Instead of starting me with this whole big bag of cash, being an adult and having all these bills you have to pay and this credit card to keep track of and this checkbook to keep track of, they start off with just 3/4. And those 3/4 became $5. And then $5 became $10 a week. And then that became, $20 a month, or maybe $100 a quarter, or maybe $500 every 6 months. That budget slowly got bigger, and I had more and more practice at managing that budget. And so by the time I was a teenager and I was buying my own toiletries and putting gas in my car, and I was also buying the family groceries because I could drive, then I already had that budget under control because I knew how to spend it because I'd been doing so for a decade at that point.
Now, for both of you, and this has actually got me a little bit scared. Doug, you said that truly to get kids to understand how to manage their money is just to let them spend it. And then they'll make some mistakes and you have to step back and look, guide them through that process. But I think of, gosh, if I were to give my teens money and just sit back and let them just take control of it, I feel I will be nervous. So what is the approach to that?
The whole point is that when you give a young child some money, that they know its power. They've watched you use the money. They know that you can do anything you want with that money. And now they have the money in their own hands. They have the power. And the last thing they want to know from a parent is that they're supposed to save any of that money. And if you tell a 6-year-old that they're going to put their savings, that money that they thought they had, that they have to now save that in something called the college fund, that's like 2 lifetimes away for a 6-year-old. And why would anybody want to pay somebody for more school in the first place? So when you're that age and you have money and people try to talk to you about saving it, the first thing you want to do is you want to avoid having the authorities confiscate all your assets. And so you'll spend it as fast as you can. And you're absolutely right. It is wasted. And there are many, many mistakes made with managing that money when kids start out at a young age with a few dollars. And it's a push and pull, a tug of war sort of, with the money you give them and the money they're going to waste. Now, you might have been spending that money anyway. For example, when you take them to the grocery store and you let them spend a couple of dollars on buying one special thing from the grocery store, you might have bought that one special thing anyway from your own money, but by giving the $1 or $2 to the child and giving them the choice, they learned how to manage some money. They learned how to spend some money. They learn how to make decisions and choices and trade-offs and compromises and everything else. And you've set up a teachable moment for that experience with that money. And so that's the whole idea, is you're taking the money that you would probably spend on that child eventually anyway, and you're giving them a little bit of it to manage. Now, you're giving them a few dollars to manage when they're 6 or 7 years old. And the whole idea is that the mistakes they make at that age will be made with a few dollars. And then as they grow older, they'll start managing their money better and better. But they'll still make mistakes, but they'll get better at it. And so by the time they're teenagers, if you've been doing this for a few years, they'll still make mistakes, but the mistakes will still be with a relatively small amount of money. And you can recover from it. Again, you've got teachable moments, and you can have a discussion about the feelings and decisions and what plan would you come up with the next time and what would you do differently. All of this is some wasting of money, of course, because they're learning to manage it and they're learning to make choices. But it's also much less than would be wasted if they started doing this at their first job after high school, or their 401k, or their retirement. And so you can waste a few dollars teaching them to manage money when they're very young, waste a few $10 and $20 bills when they're a little older. If that's when you start, it's still better than wasting hundreds or even thousands of dollars when they become young adults.
Indeed.
And
risk managing earlier on, right?
I was going to say that the risk management is the key, but it's what the person that suffers the most, I think, is the parent. There's one author, David Owen, he wrote a book, The First National Bank of Dad. And in there, he says, when you give young kids money to manage, you have to have a mental picture of giving them a $20 bill and watching them light it on fire and then run around the backyard like it's a 4th of July sparkler. And that's how they're going to handle their money until they learn to manage it better.
And quite literally in my case, because I actually did buy 4th of July sparklers and fireworks. I did actually light a couple of $20 bills on fire. So it's going to happen.
Every year.
Yeah.
And eventually they will run out of money, or they'll find that the experience of spending that money wasn't as fulfilling as they thought it was going to be, right? That toy wasn't as much fun. That TV commercial lied to you. Your friends had different, Carol's nodding her heads. Yeah. Pokemon, right?
Pokemon, a placemat that was part of a 4-set that I got peer pressured into, way too many Yu-Gi-Oh cards.
When your friends tell you to go spend money. And so all those things are experiences that parents and siblings, everybody can talk about and discuss. How did you feel? What happened? How do you feel that happened? What would you do differently? Do you have to stand up for yourself? Or maybe you've got a child who's a natural saver. And now the discussion is, well, how long would it take you to save up for that really big toy? Or how would it feel if you finally buy that PlayStation 5 out of your own savings? And how could you earn more money? I mean, those are all good questions to have. And it's not a criticism of what the child is doing as much as a discussion. Validate the feeling and ask them how they would do things differently and talk about the different solutions.
And I think that's a key component there, is truly understanding the emotions behind money, right?
Right.
So Carol, as you, especially in your teenage years, were you very emotionally attached because you want to keep up with your friends? And, how did you balance between saving? I think one part of your book you mentioned when everybody was talking about what they would do at 5,000, you're like, oh, I got 5,000 in my 401k or something like that. How was that reaction with your friends?
It was 2 parts. So the one thing that I really felt that I was missing out on was having a cell phone. Mom and Dad refused to buy me a cell phone. They didn't see the point in it. It was like, it was the 90s beeper. It was this thing that was just there to tell you had more work coming. But I saw a cell phone as like a social ticket. That was how people were texting each other to say, we have, a meetup this weekend. Do you want to go bowling? Or, hey, we have this big project due next week, Wednesday. We should all get together tonight and work on that project. And so that was the nice thing about having my money, was that I actually went to AT&T at the time because they had the best network, and I bought my own pay-as-you-go phone. And the funny thing is, it's been, oh good Lord, it's been 10 years, and I've still had that same phone number since I first got that pay-as-you-go phone. I mean, it's been sustainable. It's been important to me. But that also kept me from buying, all of the different brand name clothes that we would have worn as teenagers that, as we look back as adults, we're like, why were we wearing that 10 years ago?
Now, even with brand name, people in today's society, not only do they want to keep up with the Joneses, but they want to show status symbol as well. And one point there, you talk about even buying stuff from the thrift store.
Mm-hmm.
How, especially for people that like, no way am I going to wear something that somebody else has worn. How do you get people to change that mindset and look at it from the savings point of view versus the status perspective?
I would say that. Go ahead,
I'm
Dad.
thinking Disney t-shirts myself.
Yes.
Exactly. And that was the big thing. It was, I want to have a Disney t-shirt, but I could not afford Disney prices. I could not afford, I think it was something like $20 a t-shirt at a time, which doesn't sound that bad nowadays. But when you're 6 years old and $20 is how much you get after, I thought it was like 6 months or something like that at the time.
Yeah.
It took a while. And so I could have the one $20 t-shirt from Disney. I was going to save up for 6 months, or I could go to the thrift store and I could get 6 Disney t-shirts for the price of $10. And so now I could wear Disney almost all the time. I mean, there's only 5 days of school a week. I could wear all the shirts anytime I wanted to. And so, yes, it is hard on the one hand to think, oh, this t-shirt came from somebody else. But that's part of the reason why we invented, washing machines and all these other technologies that help make things easier to turn over, really. There's an entire market in secondhand clothing as well. So you'd be surprised, even if you're not the first owner, you'd be surprised how much that price can be knocked down just by being the second and maybe even the third owner.
I'd like to hear from the audience, maybe just using the chat. How many of you are for or against thrift shops? I know a lot of people, I've had friends tell me, absolutely not. I'm never going to step foot in a thrift store, not only because of the, thinking about this is what somebody else has worn, but more so from the fact is they just don't want to be seen there. What if somebody sees me there? They kind of lose their status, according to their other friends. Daniel says he loves them, but my wife doesn't. So Doug, your wife was really in alignment with, your plan for financial independence.
Yes.
What would you suggest for those who want to live their life, in the now, not thinking about the future? Hey, I mightn't be around for the future, versus a spouse who is more a little bit, conservative and want to make sure that they do have enough for the future. How do you, I guess, bridge the balance between the two spouses and get them to align their thoughts?
Well, this becomes very personal in the military, and the first book talked about that same issue because I frequently get the attitude of why should I save and invest for tomorrow? I might get killed in training tomorrow, and even in war. And the answer to this question is usually one person in a couple discovers financial independence, and the other person is kind of along for the ride. I mean, it sounds like a good idea to have money and to not spend it all, but they want to do it their own way. Unfortunately, usually the person who discovers the financial independence idea first is really enthusiastic and maybe wants to dip into every penny of the budget and understand where all the money is going. And the other spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend is a little reluctant that there's going to be a clampdown on spending. Maybe it'll even be a no spend challenge month or a buy nothing year. You see all that all over the financial independence blogs from the really hardcore minimalists. And they're afraid that they're going to be begging for money to do whatever they think is normal, whatever they think is the bare minimum of life, let alone to be able to go shop at a retail outlet if they want. And so the best compromise I can suggest for that is this is going to sound silly, to give each other an allowance. And by doing that, the person who's really enthusiastic about financial independence, they can stop behaving like the budget police. They can stop feeling like they're the authority figure or being in charge of all the spending. And the other person in the relationship feels like they finally got some money that they can control, that's their own money. And the whole idea behind allowance is that there's no judging and there's no criticism. And I don't care if you're 6 years old or if you're 25 years old or if you're 55 years old, that allowance that you each have is your money to spend however you think is necessary. And it's not something that you have to justify or even write down in the budget. Literally the budget category is her allowance and his allowance. And you don't have to talk about whether you ate lunch out every day that week or whether you bought coffee every morning or whether you're saving.
Tesla.
Yeah, exactly. But that's a good point. You can save it up every month, right? If you don't spend it that month, you can save it up the next month and you can start building up a big account for yourself for a really big prize. And so you have your allowance and you get to spend it as you want without having to justify it. That really seems to ease up the pressure in the relationship over how frugal you're going to be and how much you're going to try to drive up your savings rate and how hard you're going to hustle. I will say two things though. One is that if somebody really, really wants to do something and the other spouse isn't so sure about it, the other spouse can say, you're going to have to pay for that out of your allowance. And then the other thing we do in our family is whenever I'm working on a project and I think I know what I'm doing and it doesn't go the way I wanted and suddenly I've broken something, you frequently in a house, I will hear the words, that's coming out of your allowance, just like you tell your 6-year-old, right?
Right.
But that lets everybody have some spending choices and feel free of the scrutiny and the criticism and maybe even the judging that can go on if you had to document where you spend every penny.
Yeah, that's certainly going to help with the arguments over money or, pointing fingers. Well, it's because of you that, we're not meeting our budget this month type of behavior, indeed. Now,
Alyssa's got the good point there in the chat where she talks about it being fun money and you don't have to itemize it. Yeah, right?
Yeah,
exactly. Whether it's $50 a month or $200 a month, it's yours.
Now, we're all talking about developing this money mindset. And one of the comments is, the military culture isn't built for saving. What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, so I'd like to field this one. You have to remember that the military at large, which is one of the things I actually really enjoyed about the military, is the perfect cross-section of the United States. You have the entire spectrum of folks from every kind of socioeconomic background. And so when you have all these folks coming together, you have to remember we've all been exposed to American commercialism as well. And so the first thing everybody's going to do, because for a lot of folks, this is the first time they've had money, is they're going to spend it the way they please. And this is where things start becoming a game of making it rain or one-upping each other. This is when the nice clothes and the nice cars and all the things that people have always wanted to have but have never had the opportunity to have come out. And there is an opportunity to learn more about being financially savvy in the military. In the Navy in particular, we have what are called command financial specialists. And then we also have Fleet and Family Service Centers, support centers. And what they'll do is they'll give classes. One of them is literally called the $1 Million Sailor, how you can become a sailor with $1 million. But not a lot of people hear about this because that's not what they see on the waterfront, and that's not what they see at the barracks, and that's not what they see as people are coming in and out of deployments or in and out of exercises. And so it's less about the bad culture of the military as much as people don't see the whole culture.
Yeah, and I think one part of it too is coming back to that commercialism, consumerism as well. Military folks are bombarded with quite a bit of offers, because they got the stable job, everybody wants their business. And a lot of times they get sucked into these loans. So it's, again, coming back and looking at your budget and that privilege of choice, right? Understanding, do I want this, or do I want to have a fulfilled life later on? Indeed. Now, we've been talking about families, and what about, for the singles service members out there? How do they get started? Do they have an edge over people that have a family?
You don't have to share your allowance with anyone.
You don't have to share your allowance with anyone. You don't have to set up a household for anybody. There are a lot of single military members that have this great advantage of the only person they have to worry about is themselves. They don't necessarily have to worry about someone else's medical bills. They don't necessarily have to worry about someone else's credit card debt. And so the best advantage that they have is because that paycheck is quite literally all to themselves, they can start saving on a really high savings rate, and they can be as frugal as they want to be without having to deal with someone else's input.
I'll go a step further and say that when you're single, you're still able to have roommates, just like you might have had when you're growing up and sharing your bedroom with somebody as a roommate, or in college, or in recruit training, or out at sea, or in the field. You can have roommates in your house. And if you get paid a military housing allowance, then you're able to save the extra money from your housing allowance just by having roommates share a house. And the civilian version of that is known as house hacking. Again, you go out and rent a place and have 2 or 3 roommates, whether you buy the place and your roommates are paying your mortgage, or whether all 3 of you split the rent the same way, however you do it. That's one of those shelter decisions that lets you really cut down your housing expenses and really jack up your savings rate.
And especially when you get that VA loan at 0% down, you definitely have some room to, grow your finances that way as well.
There's many stupid ways to use the VA loan, and there's many very smart ways to use the VA loan. And that's an example of a good way to use it, is to get that loan and have roommates, and that should work out. And I've got a lot of friends in the military who do use that VA loan, whether they're in uniform or out of uniform. It's a great way to build wealth. But again, it's a personal choice. And if you're having problems with roommates, or if there's too much turbulence or drama in your life, again, you have to think about whether you're still feeling challenged and fulfilled with the idea of having a high savings rate for roommates, or maybe you're just ready to go have a place of your own where you can be on your own and be by yourself, and that's your space. It can vary, and it can vary over the years, not just with your personality.
Now, Doug, you had the opportunity to start many years ago, and then, as a result of your efforts, be able to retire a millionaire. What do you suggest for those of us who are just getting started now?
The joke is, it's an old Chinese proverb, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time to plant a tree is today. And so the finances of saving for financial independence depend on how much time you have to let that stuff compound. So if you're 6 years old and you're saving your allowance religiously and never spending any money, that's a lot of compounding time by the time you're in your 20s. And nobody does that. On the other hand, if you are starting to save in your 20s, maybe you've paid off student loans or consumer debt, or however you started working toward financial independence, again, you do want to give that money time to compound. But initially, the most important part about reaching financial independence is your high savings rate. And a high savings rate will overcome a whole bunch of other mistakes. If you accidentally spin out your car in a snowbank or an icy patch in the road and you damage it, you're going to feel bad about that. But you've also got a high savings rate, and you'll recover quickly from the damage and the repair expenses. If you make a mistake on a income tax return, or you make a mistake with a bill and you have to pay interest or extra penalties on that, again, you'll feel a little dumb for having made that mistake, and maybe you'll fix your system so that you don't make that mistake again. But again, a high savings rate will overcome a lot of mistakes. In my case, investing in the 80s and 90s, we paid a lot of expenses in mutual funds. And today, of course, we know how to do that much better. So the most important thing to change your life and get started down that road to financial independence is a high savings rate, especially if you don't have the time for compounding. I've got couples that come to me sometimes in their 40s and 50s, and I can't tell them that we're going to make this stuff compound in the stock market for 20 years. But again, that high savings rate, I'm not saying that you should go on a spending diet or spend 6 hours a day in a financial gym getting your finances in shape. When I talk about raising your savings rate, what I mean is tracking your spending for a few months, cutting out those things that you're clearly feeling like you're wasting money on. And then after that, keep looking at it and seeing what you can improve. And maybe you got it down to the point where you got your expenses down to the absolute minimum standard that you're willing to accept. And the next question is, could you earn more? How would you do that? What would that look like? And you keep working on that. The high savings rate is a combination of higher income and lower expenses, however you choose to work that out.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talked about, go ahead.
There's one more thing. The modern era, I mean, it's gotten so much easier since the days when mom and dad was talking about in the 80s and 90s because of the internet. I mean, the internet is a wonderful place because when people say, well, I'm not really sure where to start, and you say, where do I start in financial independence? You literally type that into Google, and that's a bunch of good information right there. One of the other things I really appreciated, there's an app called Acorns that I haven't personally used, but a lot of my sailors use, because what it would do is it would look at your spending for the month and it would round out that spending. Let's say you spent $151.64. It could round that out to $200, or it could round out just those cents, and it would throw that into an investment account for you automatically. And so rather than trying to do this big game of, I need to have $500 at the end of the month, what it would do is just take the little pennies and you would get started there. And so you're like, okay, I saw a couple of cents, and now let's see if I can beat that by a quarter next month, or $1 next month, or $10 next month. And it becomes more of an entertaining game than a chore.
Yeah, and indeed, and you see your progress with that too, right? The baby steps that counts. And on that same note too, so we just talked about, is it too late to start? But what about, I often get people saying, Nicole, I'm always living paycheck to paycheck. I just can't get my footing. So I'm never going to be able to reach financial independence. How do you encourage persons like that, especially when they're having a hard time in this COVID situation? Their hours have been reduced. How do even people think about starting to save?
I was going to let you go, Dan.
Okay, I'll tackle that one. COVID has caused a lot of people who aren't working to spend a lot more time at home and have a lot fewer opportunities to spend money. And so it's ironic that maybe you've lost your job and your income, but you've also lost a lot of the normal expenses that you would have for commuting, activities that you can no longer go to from a pandemic, and dining out, even just going to a bar, which seems pretty straightforward and simple and is now amazingly out of reach. So that's a pandemic problem, and it's not an easy situation to live through when you suddenly have all of your spending screeched to a halt like that and you're worried about your job. Day to day in a more normal world, again, if you're feeling like you're always spending paycheck to paycheck, then you definitely need to find a peer group or somebody to work with, maybe even an accountability buddy. But the whole idea is to either get online or find somebody that you can talk with about finances, and maybe they're seeing something you're spending that you're not seeing. Maybe you're spending on a lot of entertainment that to you seems to be of value. And once you sit down and look at that spending, instead of it being very clear to you what it's going to cost you an extra time and effort in your life, extra life energy, maybe it's clear to somebody else where the money is being wasted. And so it's always helpful. I get a lot of questions from people that everybody comes to me with a question and says, I don't want to share this question in front of anybody else because I'm the only one in the world that's making this mistake and I don't know how to fix it. Well, from my side of it, I have literally hundreds of people coming to me to tell me that they're the ones making this unique mistake. We're all making the same mistakes. And so if you've got somebody who can help look over your expenses, that's one big change. I joke about starting a relationship, but the reality is that if you've got a couple in a committed relationship and they're both working toward the same goal of financial independence, it actually feels challenging and fulfilling. It's not like you're dragging one person along, and it's not a rivalry. It's just that you both can see the progress and you can see how you're building a new life together with new choices. And if you do that online in a Facebook group or a social media group of people that are like-minded, then you can talk about these choices. You know, how do I reduce my transportation costs? Well, maybe it turns out you really can ride a bicycle, or maybe you can come up with another way to get to work that doesn't cost as much as you think is necessary. Or maybe you'll live closer to work, or maybe you'll change your job. It's that out of the box thinking that might not occur to you, but will occur in a Facebook group or some other large group of people. That's the best way to start.
The other thing I would add to that is look to your neighbors. You know, coronavirus has a lot of people that are on a travel lockdown, and they have a lot of pets and a lot of kids at home, and sometimes they just need an extra set of hands. And you'd be surprised what you can barter for. Sometimes it can be as simple as, hey, I will take care of your kids for the next 3 hours. And that could be like, you know, you get a portion in the streaming subscription, so now you get to watch movies for free. Or it could be something more complex like, hey, for $20 a week, I can take on all the pet walking deals. I know there's a really good story I heard the other day. There was a family where their oldest son loves watching the trash truck. And so he gets paid $1 per trash can per week by neighbors just to put their trash cans in and out of the driveway every day for them. So he's not the one having to haul out at 6:30 in the morning. He's the one hauling out at 6:30 in the morning so that the neighbors don't have to do that. And if you add that up, if you just get 10 houses, that's $10 a week, depending on the number of trash cans that they have. Multiply that by the number of weeks in a year. And that's a lot of money right there.
No, and that brings up another good point about reaching out for help. I think too many times people feel like, you know, they can't reach out to their neighbors or anybody, even joining a group to get more ideas. I mean, I have been one that I would get together with my neighbors and say, hey, let's buy, you know, this 50-pound box of chicken and we'll split it because we're getting a cheaper price, you know, and we'll split it numerous ways. Or really looking back at, what am I spending? Where is my money going every month? And what is it that I can share with somebody else to help, again, reduce that cost? Because at the end of the day, even if I'm saving $10 a month, that's $10 extra I can be putting into a savings account, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Now, a question from the audience is, what are 5 things that you wish you knew as a new member in the military when it comes to money? I know I didn't take as good advantage of my TSP as I should have. But especially, you know, think about the new service member and somebody who's been in there for a couple of years. What is it that they can truly now take advantage of to help them on their financial journey?
Sarah, you want to go first, or should I take that one?
I have a couple right off the bat. When it comes to things that you should know in the military, number one, I don't care how smart you are, just find out, go to mypay.com or mypay.dfast.mil. Just go on there and read how to read your LES. I know you think you know what's going on, but you'd be surprised at little tidbits that you can find. It seems like no matter how many times I go to finance, someone always manages to mess up my withholding, and someone always manages to mess up my state. And because I'm dual mil, someone always messes up who gets the dependent BAH. And so no matter how many times you think you've gone over your LES, it's completely worth it just to go to DFAST, go to MyPay, just go back into the system and make sure you understand what your LES is really saying.
And that's all part of the 20 minutes a day. Even looking at your bank account, making sure that there are no mistakes, that there wasn't a double withdrawal. All these things are usually automated and we just kind of set it and forget it. But we really need to make sure that we're being very vigilant about our finances. Now, David asked the question, what about if you're in your 40s? Well, I know today even I had a discussion with my financial advisor and he was like, okay, are you maximizing your IRA, your 401k? You know, making sure that you have this list of, especially that free money from your organizations. For those of you who are civilian and you're working and you have a matching 401k or 403b, that is free money that often a lot of people just kind of leave behind. So what is it that service members can maximize more of, would you say, and especially, you know, the ones who were a little bit older?
Well, I was answering some of that question in the chat, and the first step, usually the thing that seems to be holding you back in your 40s, is paying off debt. Now, maybe it's good debt like a mortgage or a student loan, but maybe it's less than good debt like consumer or car loans. And so I would say focus on getting out of debt. Once you've gotten rid of the bad debt, then the next thing to look at is tracking your spending, cutting out the waste, and just keep iterating on those steps. And I say that as if it's simple, and maybe it is fairly easy to explain in a soundbite, but the act of going back over your spending after a few months and figuring out where did all the money go that you've been tracking spending, that can take a good hour in a month to figure out what you want to change for your spending in the future. And then figuring out how to set yourself up so that you don't feel like you're leading a life of deprivation. So there's a constant push and pull again to control that spending and make sure you're aligning your spending with the things that you value and the things that you're willing to work the extra hours to pay for. And then you just keep iterating on that and keep going. I will say that when you're in your 40s, it can seem like it's going to take forever to get this to work, and you feel like you're running out of time. And as humans, we can see exponential growth on a mathematical formula, but when you're putting on a chart or a graph, you're down for 10 years, you're down here where you can barely see things going up. And the second half of that period, the second 10 years, is when the exponential growth really starts happening, right? It really starts to curve up and go up fast. But if you're still stuck in this first 10 years when you're saving and growing your wealth a little bit at a time, it's hard to see that incremental progress. And the biggest changes in your net worth happen during that last 5 years, that last 10 years of the 20 years that you're striving for your financial independence. So it becomes boring execution and iteration. And again, it feels like it's going to take forever. But once you feel like you've got the spending under control, then the next step is to look for other ways to earn more. And those are difficult decisions. In your 40s, you've probably got a family, you've probably got some obligations. Maybe you've been through some financial disasters in the past and you're recovering from those. So it's not as simple as saying, oh, just go out and get another job, go out and get a degree and triple your salary. But you should be able to look at these things and try to figure out what your real options may be and what you're willing to do. And they're tough choices. It's not simple, but I will say that the math works from ages 20 to 40. The same way as starting at 40, the math works the same way from age 40 to age 60. And when you're starting in your 40s, you've got much more wisdom, you've got much more experience, and you've got the patience, I think, that comes with getting older, the understanding that you can go through this and get through this without getting impatient and maybe even burning out.
And I would say the same thing happens with a lot of 401ks, TSPs, et cetera. And correct me on the numbers, Dad, but once you hit your 50s, you actually have a higher baseline contribution that you can go. The rest of us are limited to $19,500 a year. But
Yes.
Once you're in your 50s, correct me if I'm wrong, Dad, it's something like $57,000 a year?
Well, you can do an extra $6,000 a year in your thrift savings plan or your 401k, an extra $1,000 a year in your IRA, and we call that your catch-up contribution.
Yes.
And it's nice, but it's also acknowledging that you're starting later and telling somebody who can only save $10,000 a year that they can now save an extra $6,000 a year in their 401k. That's not going to make them happy.
Mm-hmm.
But you can try to save faster and shelter that money in a retirement account that is deferred from taxation for quite a while.
And I would say that's more advantageous for, like you said, if suddenly the kids go off to college and you have this pot of money that is no longer being spent, or if you finally arrived in your career, you've hit that golden moment where suddenly your salary just doubled from $200,000 to $400,000. It's like, whoa. And you want to get that money out of your hands, out of the taxable hands and into tax advantage accounts as fast as you can.
Indeed, and that's another great point there. When you're changing jobs, especially, and you're getting a higher salary, that is another point there you should be revisiting. What else can I do with this extra money? You've been living with, let's say, $30,000 all the time. Now you're into $40,000. You have some flexibility there to save as well. Now, as we talk about, this planning with 401k, maybe it is probably a little bit difficult for some of us who just can't get our footing right now. But one thing I usually, tell people is that if you don't think you can become a millionaire in your lifetime, is to leave a legacy for your children. And Doug, I know you started Carol early with her college saving plans and her 401k. And I think parents don't realize that if you start early, I've started my kids, especially with the IRA. My 16-year-old, he works a little bit for me, so I provide him a W-2, and he can use that money into an IRA. So in 10 years and 15 years, he is growing this money tax-free. So tell us about, if it isn't working for us specifically to become millionaires, what are some strategies that we could employ for our kids to become millionaires?
Well, with your kids when they're growing up, you're teaching them initially early on to just manage the money. And we talked about how to manage and make all those mistakes. Once you feel like they have the basics down on managing the money, the next step is to give them the incentives not to badger them and admonish them to save, but to give them the incentive to save. Yeah, Carol's all about the incentives, and I can tell you how well the admonishment worked out.
Yeah, it didn't. No.
Yeah. And by an incentive, I mean that you could tell your kids that if they'll save their money in the Bank of Carol, that the Bank of Carol will pay 1 penny per dollar per month of interest. Now, kids can't do 1.5%, but they can certainly look at 1 penny per dollar per month. And you can show them on charts and certificates and all kinds of ways to make that look exciting and interesting and fun. And when you're giving that kid that financial incentive to cut coupons or to walk to school instead of riding the bus, or ride their bikes more, or to bring a lunch from home, all those ways of giving them money, that gives them more and more money to manage and helps them get better at managing their money and saving it. Now, you talk about a teenager and a Roth IRA, whether they're doing that at home and they're earning money at home, that's earned income. There's a specific exemption in the tax code for family businesses where they're earning money and they can put that into their Roth IRA. Or when they get that first job as a teenager, again, you've got W-2 earned income. You can put that money into a Roth IRA. So that's another big incentive to save, is understanding that compounding. By the time they're teenagers, you can put together that spreadsheet that shows them how to be $1 million sailor, or $1 million 40-year-old if they're saving that money. Now, I'm talking about motivating a teenager to save and invest and reach financial independence, and how hard could it be? Mom and dad are doing it, but
yeah, about those teenagers.
Yeah, it's not just about the teenagers. It's about the parents, because one day as a parent, you might be disabled, or you might even have some cognitive problems when you're elderly, and you might not be able to manage your finances anymore. And it would be really nice to have somebody in your family who you trusted and who you knew had the financial skills to manage their money and manage your money. So we talk about building a legacy and teaching our kids to become millionaires, but really it's all about us grown-ups and us older people making sure that we have somebody who can help take care of our money when we're older. And in my particular case, my experience has been a multi-generational bag job where my grandfather went and mismanaged his money for many years before my father found out about that, and had to spend literally years untangling all the problems with taxes and overdue bills and other things. And for 20 years, my father shared that story about what my grandfather did to him, and said, but I'm not going to do that to you boys. Until he did. And unfortunately, Alzheimer's took away his cognition before he was feeling comfortable with sharing his finances and helping to make sure he had something in place for us to help him manage his money when the time came. Now, I don't want Carol to spend the rest of her life hearing these stories from my father and my grandfather and wondering when it's going to happen to her. Right. And so we have, in our family, we have opened the books so she understands where all the money is, where it comes from, the incomes, the expenses. She can actually, with the powers of attorney and the revocable living trust we've set up, she can actually watch where the money goes, and she can understand. So, if we go out there and buy a Tesla, she's probably going to see that happen. Now, it's coming out of my allowance. So that's pretty clear.
Oh yeah.
But the whole point is that she can see what our lives are like and see what our spending is and see what's going on. And so if she ever does need to step in, if there's a horrible surfing accident out there and I may have one day, or if our cognition decays away as we're getting very old, at least Carol will be familiar with our finances and won't feel that caregiver stress that comes from having to step in and take care of your parents and find all the money and figure out what bills need paying and all the other things that go with that. So,
and I can ask the questions now. If I am unfamiliar
while
with something,
we're around to talk about it.
I mean, I know that there's different kinds of VA benefits, so I can specifically go to mom and dad and say, hey, are you under the pre-1986 version or the post-9/11 version or the new 2020 version? Like, what policy do you fall under? And I can ask those questions now, and I can take those notes now and put them in my, in case of emergency file, so that when the time comes to, if all of a sudden someone changes a number on me, I can say, no, they've been doing this. I know this. They told me this, and they've been doing this for the last 16 years.
And what better time is to start now to have those conversations with your family members, the younger kids, just because we never know. Even, I do the same thing with my children. I make sure that they're aware of everything that we have. So God forbid something happens to mom and dad, they know, they're not just scampering and all that information is in one particular area. We have somebody saying that they involve their children with looking at the utility bills. And that gives them an idea, that when mom and dad are trying to make decisions about purchases, it's not just, well, this arbitrary abstract thought, but here it is where our money is going. This is why I'm asking you nicely to take the, be careful conserving power, these types of things. So really getting your kids involved and having those conversations.
Carol, do you remember, I don't know if you remember this story, but do you remember that night you turned on the oven and forgot, and we didn't remember it until the next morning? You do remember that. Well, I bet what you remember even more is, having to pay for it.
Yeah, so that's the funny thing is that our local electrical company, even though we have solar panels, they actually have a meter set up so that you can read the meter every day. And so mom and dad was actually able to go and pull out that meter and do the math. And I think I owed you something like $25 for leaving the oven on overnight.
Oh my.
Yeah, I never left the oven on ever again, which is a good sign. But yeah, that was not fun.
Well, as we wrap up here, one question that's coming in is your average net worth. Do you think that we should be paying attention to our average net worth by age? Does that act as a motivator, or does it actually make us kind of succumb into despair? I'm never going to reach to this point.
I'm so far behind.
I'm not a big fan of net worth personally because it ascribes to a standard I have to maintain, and I'm not looking for a standard that I have to maintain. I'm looking for the standard that makes me happy. And so if someone in some article somewhere says you should have $5 million by the time you're 50, and I only make it to 4.5 million, am I below the standard, or am I perfectly happy because I hadn't been working for the past 20 years? The net worth is just one number. It doesn't tell you about the amount of free time you've had or the amount of quality time you've had with your family or the travel time you've been able to take. It's just one aspect of what you could possibly be depending on how that pie is exactly, accounted for.
Right.
Oh, that whole idea grew out of a book from the 1990s, The Millionaire Next Door. Most people have heard of that by now.
Yes.
And Tom Stanley just took a big bunch of data and organized it by net worth versus age. And he said, my data indicates that we've got this kind of age for this kind of net worth. And it was a snapshot of a bunch of people in the 1980s and 90s. And today, everybody's been correcting that for inflation or taking other survey data. And I think it really steals joy. They talk about how comparison is the thief of joy. And you sit there, you're 24 years old, and they say that you should have $100,000 saved by the time you're 25 years old. No pressure. And it also makes you discouraged. And it leads to that attitude of, well, what the heck, I'm already blowing that $100,000 goal, so I think I'll go out and buy myself a Tesla. Now, I'll also point out that these numbers may be totally meaningless depending on whether you're living your life in a high cost of living area or a low cost of living area. It's also totally meaningless if your expenses are paid for out of your portfolio because you have a high net worth for that and you're chewing through the principal in your portfolio. Or maybe your living expenses are paid for by your cash flow, and your cash flow is coming from investment rental properties. You may not have a high net worth in those investment rental properties, but if you've done a good job of buying them, then you're going to have some really good cash flow from them at a very low net worth. And that is a lot better than having $2 million in the stock market, even if the stock market is doing well that year. So don't make yourself miserable by comparing your progress to others. Instead, give yourself your own challenges, find it challenging and fulfilling for yourself. Take all the good ideas you can find from the internet, but if you think it's a bad idea to recycle your own toilet paper and dumpster dive for your food, well, maybe you can come up with a better idea.
Indeed. All right. Well, as we close up here now, Carol, can you tell us, especially from the parent standpoint, what is one golden nugget you want to leave for parents out there?
Don't punish yourself, and remember, it's your kids' mistakes, it's not your mistakes. What's the most important thing for you to do is just give it a shot, give it a try. And if it doesn't work today, you're going to come back again tomorrow, and you may try it again, or you may try something different. But what matters is that you at least give it a try. They talk about how success is not a perfect linear graph. It's actually one of those curlicues that goes back and forth and side to side. And when it comes to your kids, you have to remember it's not just you, it's your kids too. You can only control yourself. You cannot control your kids to the extent that you want to, at least. And so just keep on trying. It's going to be okay. Just keep on trying.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol and Doug. For the service members that have, 10 plus years under their belt, as well as for the new service members, what piece of advice would you give them to get started on their journey to financial independence?
It's going to sound like I'm a broken record reading from a script that only has 3 bullets on it. But again, I'll say track your expenses. And then after a couple of months of that, go back and review those expenses and cut out the waste. And it's a personal choice on what the waste might be. If you feel like you're leading a life of deprivation, if you're in the military, you probably know exactly where deprivation starts. And so your instincts are probably correct, and you can back off a little bit and improve your quality of life a little bit. But continue striving over the years for that high savings rate. Try to save the most of every promotion pay raise you get. Try to save the most of every annual pay raise you get. And when you get that pay raise for going over 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 or 8, try to save as much of that as you can. I'm not saying save all of it. Give yourself a party, but try to save most of it. Yeah, exactly. And so that will build your savings rate. And although a 40% savings rate is extremely challenging when you're just starting out in the military, if you start that savings rate as high as you can and strive for 40%, you will get there, and it will feel very fulfilling. That's my advice. The other advice I would give to somebody just starting out in the military, advice that I wish I'd known about 40 years ago, alcohol is overrated and expensive. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes. There was a very memorable port call where some of my fellow officers spent something like 4 digits on alcohol. And when all was said and done, they had already consumed it. So it wasn't like they were looking back on the night with pride over the actual content of the alcohol. They're looking back on the night as, and I can't believe that money is gone.
And I don't know I can't remember what I spent it on.
Right. And it's the same. The global economy is so good now that you don't necessarily need to be in that port to experience that form of alcohol. If you want to have Greek liquor, you can actually order it to the United States, things like that.
Yeah.
Well, I see one comment down here in the bottom of the chat that says using coupons is not bad. So if you get coupons for alcohol, maybe that is a justification.
Yes.
As long as you're willing to work for it.
Indeed, stretch the money. So, and then with my just added 2 cents to that is there's no better time than to start now. Don't be discouraged. This is why we're here sharing this information as well. If it's not for you, it could be for your kids or your family's legacy, but also maintain that consistency. People tend to think it's hard work, but just as Doug and Carol says, it's 20 minutes a day, if that much. You can carve out that 20 minutes. Maybe, the time that you spend on your phone, the time that you spend on Netflix, you can find some time that would truly make an impact for your life overall. So with that, again, thank you very much for you sharing your knowledge here and helping us grow, helping our audience grow. This is what we're here about with Act Now, not only providing professional resources, but helping people, really live that fulfilled life as you were talking about. So as we wrap up, Doug and Carol, where can we find more of you? How can we follow you, learn more about whatever you have coming up next?
I've been doing this for over a decade, so I'm all over the internet, and I'm usually on the first page of results for Doug Nordman and also for the Military Guide. Just search for that, and that's where I blog. I also have a Facebook profile that shows me surfing, and that entire profile is public. So feel free to stalk away, send me a message on Facebook if you have questions. I'm happy to answer questions because it makes me better at answering everybody else's questions. So if you have a question for me, find me there on social media and let me know.
Awesome. Carol?
For me, I'm also on Facebook. I'm not quite as public as Dad is, but you can also find me and you can also message me. We're working on a blog. When I say we, I mean my husband and I. We're working on a blog called childfire.com, and it's still under some construction. We're still trying to figure out how WordPress operates. So please don't mind the optical illusion that it looks like, but there is some information that we put on there as well.
Awesome. Thank you. So now I'm just going to hand it over to Jay to wrap us up for tonight's session. Thanks again, Doug and Carol, and to our audience for you just coming in and spending some time listening, and hopefully that you've gained a lot of good information that you can grow yourself and live that fulfilled life. Thanks, Jay.
How's it going, everyone? Thank you. Thank you. This was awesome. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Nicole. For those who are interested, we have some things coming up next month with Nicole. We're actually doing a series focused on resume building, how to interview, salary development, so understand the salary negotiation. So there's going to be a lot of things coming up next month, so please tune in. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I know I did. I got a plan for 20 minutes a day now, so I got to make sure I add that into my schedule. But this was great. I really appreciate it and look forward to doing another one. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.